Welcome to the Winmark Sweet Spot interview series, where we explore how to reach, lead, and deliver a C-suite role today. Today, I'm also delighted to be joined by Gloria Yang, who is the Deputy CEO of Origin Housing, but also is a non-executive director of More Homes PLC. Welcome, Gloria.
Hi, John. Thank you so much for having me here.
We're delighted to see you. So I start by asking, what did you want to be when you were a child?
Oh, starting from which age changes all the time. But I do remember, I grew up in Northeast China, so I speak Mandarin. And I also taught people to say, I grew up in the smallest city in Liaoning province, and that only have about 400,000 people.
Okay.
So yeah, the school age for me has always been about 60 or 70 kids in a room. So I always wanted to be the teacher because, that is a figure of authority, that is sharing the knowledge. But yeah, so I wanted to be a teacher.
How did you, and then did you go to university, become an accountant? How did that, because you were finance director before you were deputy MD, weren't you?
Correct. Yeah. So that goes on. So years later, then again, when I grew up, the system is we pass a state exam. So in July, for 3 days in July, everyone participate in this exam, and then your marks will take you to a certain university. Then you were allocated a subject, not necessarily by your choice. So then my subject was, I went into an institute for foreign languages, which is really good, really lovely, and then subjects I was learning was a BA for teaching in a foreign language, English. So you could almost say your childhood dream became true. But however, then at that age, I decided to, oh no, I do not want to be a teacher after 4 years. And there was a educational fair for year 3 and year 4 university students. I slipped in. And then I decided to say, oh yeah, that looks interesting to study abroad back then. And here I am in England. Once I came here, I decided to think, why did that become an IT or technology? Back then, your computing science or accountancy. In the end, I chose accountancy. On paper, it's better value for money course. Wrong choice, obviously.
Okay. So could you summarize your career for me in 1 minute then?
Yeah, so I started in a retail sector as a finance officer. Then I went into housing, started as treasury capital accountant, covered every single role, become a consultant in the sense because I specifically want certain exposure in a different organization. I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to work in different size of organization. And then came this role. Now I am the deputy chief executive because I took over the data, IT, and change function alongside the finance function and revenue. And then I took on a couple of non-executive roles, as you say, and one of them is a member of the board and also chair of the audit risk committee for Phoenix Community Housing, which has a very interesting community gateway model. And then the other one is sitting on the credit committee for More Homes PLC, who raises finances from the public market and then unlands onto the registered provider sector.
Okay. And what attracted you to the housing sector?
I fell into the social housing sector by accident. I didn't know, you may feel quite funny, grew up in China, how did you not know the concept of social housing? It does genuinely work in a very different way. And once I started into the social housing sector back in 2006, the challenges are just, one come after another, and found it is incredibly rewarding sector. That's long before we talk about ESG, the impact we are making, but it's a generally very, very rewarding sector. You have to wear a commercial hat, but really delivering to the social impact day in and day out, especially in the context of today.
Okay. And when you described your current role, you mentioned you have tech, finance, and other areas reporting to you. Is that, and you're a deputy CEO, is that just an odd question to ask, but some people might label that role as COO role. So why the deputy CEO title? How did that come about?
interesting question. I guess, it maybe depends on the size of the organization. So I think I was fortunate in a organization where, you have executive director of development, asset and compliance, and then operations, maybe similar to the COO role. Then you have the finance and you have sort of the corporate services function in that sense. So for us, I guess it probably just makes much more sense rather than, and then also the services or functions under this role is probably more corporate services rather than the traditional, or you're thinking about the customer resident services. So I think that's probably especially unique for us. We call it deputy CEO, but rather than the chief operating officer. But that's really challenging. That's probably more challenging. I will think twice again before venturing into the whole services area.
Okay, and on the journey to your current role, have there been any key moments or decisions that you've made that you feel have been key to your career?
I do think so in social housing. I think because as I say, every RP is quite unique in what they do, and I have been working in every organisation because I'm primarily London-based. So they all develop for homes for open market sales, going to joint venture with developers, with other sort of partners, raising finances. So I think the scale does mean quite a lot, and so after in my first social housing role, I've stayed in the organization for 5 years. I did 4 roles in the organization. Then I reached the head of services level. For that, the next step up will be a finance director. Back then, I know I wasn't there just yet. I need exposure to work on some larger scale change projects, or really in a different scale company has a more complex group structure as well, thinking about corporation tax planning, all those kind of things. So conscious decision back then was actually I need to move on, even though I was very comfortable, very fortunate enough, but I really need to move on to expand my horizon. So when the opportunity came and when I handed in the resignation, I was invited to have a coffee with the chief exec. So kind of like make you think, very carefully, is this the right choice? Is this the right time? And I have to say it was a very, very difficult decision, but I do see that is the first key milestone I reached, and I really was the time to move on, not to get too comfortable and consciously trying to expand.
Yeah. Okay. And have you ever had a sort of guide or mentor in your career?
Very early on, very fortunate. So before I had a formal coach, and I actually had a mentor in the sense on an informal way, where I sought advice and made me think, who I want to be, or really what interests me, and that curiosity just developed from there. And then I was very fortunate enough to have been given a coach while I was working at a assistant director level. So I was part of the organizational directors group. So the investment into the group, but also individually to have a coach. So now actually I'm in a position I could mentor other people or have a reverse mentoring. So I've been on my 3rd round of mentoring, and that was really beneficial. Yeah.
And how did how did the sort of coach versus mentor interventions, how are they different?
I think for me, my personal take is when I was given the coach opportunity or coaching opportunities, very about, thinking about the operational context, how to effectively be working as part of a leadership team. And there's a lot of, learning and seeking tools to work on your persuasion, influencing, management or leadership style. I think now at the other end of it, thinking about mentoring is for me to explore with the people I work with and think and asking the questions rather than giving advice. So in my coaching relationship, I was coached in a way it's really about performance. But now I think at the other part of it, my style is really about listening and just teasing out and sharing my experiences and getting the other party to think rather than really giving out advice about exactly, how to deal with certain situation. Yeah.
And you mentioned before that that you changed organisation, and that was a very difficult decision. Can you remind me what were the sort of main drivers behind making that decision?
I think
Okay.
one is the opportunity within the existing organization. So I only have one more role to go. I wouldn't
Okay.
be there for a couple of years. So that's the first director role. So I think for me, there are limited opportunity within the organization. And also within the 5 years, I actually covered every single role. I think, I've took out all the learning opportunity over there. The second thing is I was very specific about what sort of project I want to be involved in, and so can expand my horizon. And I think the next few consultancy roles just very very different remit and really tested out, and I learned so much from that. So I think those are the two things. Back then I was quite clear in my head what I want to get out of each opportunity, and just as chances may have it, I was able to go with a sort of plan or mini plan, and that
Okay.
worked quite well. Yeah.
And have you ever had any sort of form of career crisis or anything like that?
I wouldn't call it career crisis, but I do say it is a identity crisis, I would say. It's actually when I returned the first time I have a child and returned from the maternity leave. So I
Okay.
think there was a identity crisis moment for me, and that was late 2015.
Mhm.
So I was returning to a role as the finance director of a larger organization. But what I think gets me out of that is I feel really, really stretched in a way to say, oh, after quite a few months away, quite a few changes at the director's level. So I have a new peer group to work with. And then on the other hand, a kind of like being away from work for a while, you feel less confident. But what got me out of that was that so back in social housing sector, that's when the rent cut came in. So that was,
Yeah.
I fondly remember that was when I was doing this presentation, so thinking about the budgeting and deal with rent cut, 1% rent cut as opposed to a rent increase. I have this memory of George Osborne with his red briefcase of austerity. So I
Mhm.
remember going through that very intensive period and design a piece of work and working with everyone, very intimate small session, to talking about zero-based budgeting, talking about the issue we are facing, because that caught this whole sector by surprise. So
Mhm.
it's quite a big thing for us. But then in that sense to say, I just came back from maternity, and how do I re-establish myself and also caught up with everyone who joined at the same time in this, leadership group. So I had really those intimate small session of, kind of like budget talk. It doesn't feel at the time to say, oh, why is she doing just a couple of group of people at the time? But it's really for me to get back into the swing of things and getting to know those people, and worked really well. So that probably, that mini crisis in the sense of like a rent setting or, rent reduction, looking for efficiency, actually pull me out of my identity crisis, who do I want to be at that moment in time, and realize actually I really enjoying solving such issues and building relationships and working with people and feeling the impact on that. And yeah, that's that really.
Interesting. And on the subject of solving issues, there's obviously got this cost of living crisis at the moment, which will impact people who work for your organisation, but also many of your tenants. How are housing leaders responding to that?
I think the sector is responding really well. I think different RP providers obviously have different approaches or different immediate relief scheme, but
Mhm.
every RP will have a what we call financial inclusion team, which
Mhm.
are signposting tenants for help available, and they may also have their own cost of living fund or
Yeah.
hardship fund. So for Origin, we do have financial inclusion services, community development services, engagement, but also for this year, especially this year, we set up immediate relief. So tenants and household can apply for immediate relief. in the way of a supermarket voucher, because we believe this is the quickest way, so people do not need to think about what to spend money on, energy or food, and actually let us in our ability to help to take some of the immediate issue away for the residents. But all the RPs are doing something, but they are all similar in nature. Yeah.
And okay, thank you very much for that. And do you it's this month is the 6th of December to today. Are you feeling the beginnings of that already? Are you feeling are rent starting to default, or the funds being drawn on yet, or has it not started yet?
So we launched this specific fund back in October. So
Yeah.
far the take up is, I think it might be building up as we, kind of like word of mouth in our community, I guess. So
Okay.
we so far hasn't seen a huge take up yet, but clearly, as you say, the real situation are building up, because actually, so what has happened since the pandemic is, prior to pandemic, I guess, for the sector, probably it's not unusual our, collection consistently at a certain level. Then the pandemic came, even though we have the furlough and help, even though we had a £20 increase in universal credit, but for the first year, so between 2020 to 2021, arrears have increased to a level we still haven't seen a reduction yet. So yeah, so we are all anticipating there might be another increase on that. But yeah.
Okay. So back to your career.
Mm.
Have you found any particular barriers to your career? Have you come across any particular challenges, and how have you overcome them?
Yeah, language.
Hmm.
I think English is not my first language. I think
Mhm.
I always trying to make a conscious effort, mostly in slowing down and when I speak to get
Mhm.
myself understood. So I think that's probably one of my biggest barrier. So I'm still working on that. 20
Okay.
years later, I don't think I'll get anywhere. But people have been very accommodating. So yes.
Yeah, my wife is Austrian, and my German is still very bad. So I really wouldn't worry about it. But do you find that has in any way held you back in your career or not?
I don't think so, but I do think I have to try slightly harder in certain situations to make sure I get understood in the
Mhm.
time is needed, and that I consciously practice all the time. And because there will be situations you need to be succinct, there will be
Mhm.
situations where really important in commercial negotiations or raising fund to give people the assurance, the understanding, the confidence. And luckily, I think we did all of that. But I do think that's something I consciously trying to work on. And also, I think your presentation skill style can be different, so that has been rehearsed throughout the time as well, and your writing skill as well. I think those are really really important things, and they are all slightly different in the ways to practice.
Okay. And how do you develop your skills and knowledge on a sort of ongoing basis?
So I think the professional network, clearly, I think when Mark was this fantastic, your daily newsletter is the first thing I read every morning. Genuinely, I think that's probably is the shift through the pandemic as well. I do value this professional network a lot more, but also the online element is today, we don't have to plan diary days in advance and trying to find somewhere to meet. We can, choose a time of convenience and just sharing our experiences. I think
Mhm.
those networks, we got to be a bit more conscious, and that's probably what one of my learning style and management style has really changed through the pandemic as well. And also your professional network in terms of subscription, the webinars, all those kinds of
Mhm.
things, a lot easier, a lot accessible than before, for sure.
Okay. Okay. Very, very interesting. And what do you think it was about? Why, of all the sort of top team where you are, why do you think you got the deputy CEO role as opposed to anyone else?
expressed an interest, I guess. Not when the opportunity came along. It's actually I've always, in every role I have worked on, I always let people know what I'm interested in, and in a sort of alongside your contribution, you also express your interest. So people
Yeah.
actually have the understanding, and when the opportunity comes, you are ready, but also they are consciously working on this opportunity for you as well. So
And do you find that other people don't do that, or do you think that other people do that as well?
maybe I don't know. Maybe there's a culture thing about it. Probably I'm slightly more direct about this. Probably not as subtle as other people can think of. So,
Okay.
yeah, I've always expressed an interest, in the sense to say I really, because past project and everything. So, when I was working on every opportunity I have, always expressing interest to say, oh, technology and change is something I'm really passionate about, and I get in touch with the team, build the relationships over there. So when the time
Yeah.
comes, I think everything is ready for you to walk into that role.
Okay. Well, with that in mind, then the obvious move from being a deputy CEO is to be a CEO. And if you were to take up the CEO role, what would be the top things you would like to address in a social housing entity?
I do think, because given the economic condition, and given things are unlikely to be stabilized or easier for any organization for the foreseeable future, is thinking about partnership, what kind of effective partnership can look like. So I think the social housing sector, we build, we develop, we maintain homes, but if you look at genuine, the sort of partnership model, they exist in the form of joint venture. They exist in the form of finding a equity partner, in the sense to make it attractive, you set up a for-profit entity to attract different type of entity rather than just debt financing of a vehicle. But I do like to think, with our local authorities, with the AHS, housing trust, there's huge opportunities for us as a sector to think about. So that's probably something to think, which is slightly different, and certainly that's something I'm quite curious in. Is there any other form of partnership can exist? Because if you think about in the last couple of years, John Lewis has started to build into the social housing, affordable housing, or housing, depends what they call, but there are more and more the large partnerships or organizations out there, knowing there is a acute housing supply issue. So what can we all do together in that sense? We do have experience in management and
Yeah.
developing. Yeah.
In terms of slightly sort of separate sort of geopolitical question, because you mentioned you were brought up in northern China, is that right?
Yes,
The,
Northeast China. Yeah.
and the UK, I guess, press or language is becoming increasingly hostile. I would say, towards China. How do you feel about that? Does that impact you personally? Does that?
I, I haven't felt anything recently, but I do felt something when Brexit vote took place, if you remember, at that
Yeah.
2016. So I
Yeah.
think that's immediately after the vote become, the results become known, and the next day I experienced something quite unpleasant at a busy
Okay.
train station.
Okay.
And I
Really.
think fortunately enough, that was just a one-off incident. We didn't see anything, widespread than that. I do think, it's an absolutely diverse and loving country. People are have always expressed sound judgment about it. But yeah, so I have to say yes. I know what you are saying, but I haven't experienced anything. Yeah.
Thank you. My family's all from Yorkshire, but because I don't talk with Yorkshire accent, when I go north, I get a hard time being a soft southerner. So,
My partner is
um,
family is from somewhere in Yorkshire. Don't press me for the village. The name of the village, I'll get into trouble.
um, and when you reflect back on your careers, is there anything you would have done differently?
don't think so. But then having said that, I only have 20 years under my belt. So ask me 5 years maybe. So yeah, not yet.
And if you were to meet your young self, if that makes sense. So if you met your 25-year-old self, what advice would you give them? Knowing what you know now, what advice would you give them?
I do say the first thing will be more assertive. So I think for a very long time, I think I find that I don't know whether that's the barrier for the language, or that's just the position I was in, or that's the role I was in the sense, you know, people seeing you as a finance background, you are here for a specific reason rather than thinking about holistically in any way. So I found myself not being assertive enough to express a view or opinion. I worked a lot on the relationship, but not in the early stage of my career on a one-to-one basis. So I do hope, you know, I could find my own voice slightly early on.
Okay.
I wish, yeah.
Okay. And any final top tips for anyone embarking on a career in social housing?
Oh, just stay curious. It's absolutely rewarding sector, and you do see the impact you are making as part of the team, a great organization, a great sector. So stay curious.
Thank you, Gloria, and thank you very much for your time today. That was fantastic to hear about your experiences, and we hope to see you again very, very soon. Thank you,
Thank you
Gloria.
so much. Yeah, thank you so much, John.